Hello everyone, welcome back to Base Damage. I hope you are all doing well. Today's video is basically me going down memory lane, a little bit of story time with Kade if you would. This particular memory is one that I hold near and dear to my heart. I want to talk about my first ever regionals experience for Yu-Gi-Oh! The thing is, I initially wanted to do a small comparison video talking about my first Yu-Gi-Oh! Regionals versus my first Weiss regionals. But I feel like I've said enough bad things about Yu-Gi-Oh! Lately in several of my videos, so for this one I want to keep it mostly positive. Kind of emphasizing how much fun that TCGs are to me, and especially how much I've enjoyed playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In the past. I'm scripting this one just to get my thoughts together as best I can. It's been almost 14 years since this event happened, but I still remember most of the finer details. I just want to make sure I can say it as clearly as possible for anyone wanting to listen. If this type of video isn't your particular cup of tea, that's perfectly fine. I hope you have a wonderful day regardless and can find something good to watch or listen to. To those who do like this kind of content, please let me know down below in the comments. It would be greatly appreciated. Also, let me know if you want me to make more videos like this in the future. I have lots of different kinds of stories like these, so with all that out of the way, let's proceed with the story. So to set the scene a little bit, this was back between 2009 and 2010. Yeah, I'm certain that's a throwback for a lot of people. I admit that I don't exactly remember which year, but it was one of those two. This was back in the era of decks like Gladiator Beast and Rescue Rabbit OTK. It was definitely a different type of meta than what you see today. I know I'll probably be called a boomer for talking about these older archetypes, but I can't help it, man. This was my time. My buddy Nick, not Baksu-chan, a different Nick altogether, called me up and said they had an extra spot in his car to ride to the regionals event. One of the other guys who was going with him had to opt out, so he called me and asked if I wanted to go. I hadn't initially planned for it, but I was very excited and told him yes, that I definitely wanted to go. So he picked me up next morning bright and early to go to Apex, North Carolina. The total count was 5, with me, Nick was driving, my buddy Damien, and there was 2 other guys. I hadn't really interacted with them a lot before, but they were named Mike and Avery. All of them were super cool, and we ended up talking about a lot of strategy stuff on the way to the regionals. Well, more like they discussed the strategy stuff, and I just listened, trying to take as many mental notes as I could. They did this kind of thing on the regular, especially Mike and Damien. They were much more into the competitive scene than I was, and it was incredibly helpful to get their perspectives on the current meta at the time. The regionals was held at a card shop, and I really wish I could remember the name of the store, but for the life of me, I just can't recall it. But I can describe the location as best I can. It was in this big strip mall, and the card shop itself was quite large. I think the player turnout ended up being somewhere between like 150 to 200 players. I remember the first hurdle that I had to jump through was submitting my deck list. This was a time in my life where I was a broke college kid. I had just enough money for me that day to 1, pay Nick gas money, 2, pay for my own lunch, and 3, pay for the entry itself. Outside of that, I literally had nothing else. I didn't think I needed to bring any extra. The reason I say this was after writing down my deck list and handing it in, I remember the person wanting to check my deck, so I handed it to him, and he immediately gave me this confused look. He said he wasn't sure if the sleeves I had were allowed to be used. I had some cool looking character sleeves that had a slight reflection on the back of them. I couldn't understand the problem, but he asked the head judge, and even the head judge said they should be good. But he did ask if I had any problem with buying more sleeves that didn't have the reflective backing. I pulled out my wallet and showed him just how empty it was. I explained that I spent the last bit I had just on the entry. Unless I got my entry money back, I had literally nothing else. The head judge just nodded and told me not to worry about it. I'm certain he didn't want to give any refunds, but regardless, he was a very cool dude, especially due to another story coming up in a bit here. We proceeded on with the first round. We all got seated against our first opponents, and everyone was super chill. Several other people that I knew from our locals, or even other shops that I had visited, showed up, so it was cool to see plenty of familiar faces. While at the same time, I made several friends at this specific regionals, whom I continued to interact with for many years later on. The next hurdle that hit not just me, But every single player at this event happened right before the first round. The people organizing the event got on a microphone to say a couple things before round 1 started up. The typical, thank you for coming, the number of people there, the number of rounds there would be, etc. And then they hit every person in there with a sucker punch. They said that there were new changes to the game being implemented that day. These changes that happened no longer exist today at all, just wanting to make that clear. So everything I'm about to explain is completely negligible right now. But at the time, it confused the actual hell out of every single one of us. For a little bit of explanation, when monsters battle in Yu-Gi-Oh, there are several steps to the battling process. I'll try not to get too terribly technical with the explanation. I'll put a little infographic on screen to help try to explain it as concisely as possible. The organizers proceeded to explain there would now be 4 sub-steps to the damage step. The main reason for this was due to a card called Honest that was a big pain at the time with Lightsworn and whatnot. They made it so all chains resolved in each individual sub-step before moving on to the next sub-step. It was very confusing at first. I understand it, obviously, after the fact, but at the time, everyone's kind of looking at each other going, what? I don't think introducing this right as players are about to start their first round of a regionals was a good idea at all. We had no warning about this prior to the event starting, and luckily this new implementation didn't really affect me that much. I was running Blackwings for this tournament, and only had to worry about 1 card for that ruling, but it didn't really come up, thank goodness. We proceeded with the tournament starting up officially, and I vaguely remember clutching out a round 1 victory. Because it's been so many years since this occurred, I don't sadly remember a lot of my opponents outside of what decks they played. I remember playing probably against 3 or 4 Gladiator Beast players' decks over the course of the day. One specific guy, though, played Rescue Cat OTK, and he completely destroyed me. But it was a super fun game regardless. 2 games were a Blackwing mirror match, one of which was against my buddy who drove, Nick, the guy I rode with to the tourney. I can proudly say I won that match, and I remember Nick being super salty about it. He jokingly said that I was walking back home, and the whole table had a good laugh about it. It was really funny. The next hurdle I vividly remember having to deal with happened around round 4 when I got paired against a guy who was playing Synchro Plants. I had met him briefly before with a couple other friends at a different locals, so I was actually excited to try playing against him, but our entire table got stopped for a deck check. Me and 3 other players all had to give our decks to the judges for them to make sure we hadn't swapped out any cards. I think this was due to a different player at our table, not me or the Plant Synchro guy, but I think they had done some sus shit in the previous round, but regardless, I thought I was in the clear. The judge came back to me specifically and told me he had to issue me a warning. On my deck list that I had submitted, I had accidentally wrote down something wrong. I had only wrote down that I had 1 singular copy of a synchro monster called Colossal Fighter, when in actuality, I had 2 copies in the extra deck. Obviously, this was an honest mistake. The judge told me this was more than likely just an accident. He was really cool about it. He said he couldn't imagine anyone trying to cheat with that particular card, so he didn't see a reason to give a harsh punishment, like a game loss or anything. He just let me off with a warning and just said to be more careful in future events. He could clearly tell that this was like the first time I had ever gone to a major event and probably figured, hey, he's nervous. He probably just wrote down the wrong number. I told him thank you and all was good. All the more reason, I say, to give respect to the people organizing any big events like this. I played through the rest of the rounds like I mentioned before, without any other crazy things going on. The only exception to this was being that the air conditioning broke, so it was a very muggy building with well over 100 people playing card games in the middle of summer. It didn't bother me all that much, but I definitely remember hearing a lot of other players complaining about it. But let's get down to the overall results. I'm trying to remember my overall wins and losses, but the main thing I do remember is that the top 32 all got invites to nationals. I had lost 2 or 3 games overall that day, and my placement ended up being 31 out of the top 32. So I actually ended up getting a Nationals invite. I sadly wasn't able to use it and go to Nationals because, once again, broke college kid. I couldn't afford the travel, but this still made me insanely happy to even have the invite because I never felt like I was any good. Even now, I kind of question if I deserved it, but whatever. I remember having to wait until very late that night for them to finish the finals and everything. One of the guys who came with us, named Mike, had gotten to the top 8 cut, and I want to say he got like 2nd or 3rd place overall. I just remember being so exhausted at this point, I just wanted to go home. The trip back was very quiet as most of the guys fell asleep. I myself slept very well that night when I did finally get home, and I can definitely say that I greatly enjoyed the tournament overall. I remember having conversations with some of the guys later on down the road, kind of discussing what all had happened in our rounds and everything. So it was still like really fun even after the fact, even after the day of. It was definitely a different time for the game as a whole, but this may be the Yugi boomer in me saying this, but I do look back on those days very fondly. There was at least 2 other people I remember I said at the beginning of the video I met at that regionals. I ended up meeting them at conventions like Animazement in years later on down the line. It was always fun to make new friends at any tournament I went to, no matter the player turnout. I do have a slight competitive side to myself, but I always prefer to have fun over winning. There have been so many matches I've played, whether it be Yu-Gi-Oh or something else, where sometimes even if I lost, I still had a huge smile on my face. Having that positive interaction and meeting people who always thought the same felt way better than just the win-win-win mentality to me. Even playing against the Rescue Cat guy, I still had a really, really fun time. And that is going to be it for Storytime with Kade for today. Thank you very much for listening, and I do hope you enjoyed. As I stated before, this is a video I've wanted to make for a while. I feel bad sometimes for saying such bad things about Yu-Gi-Oh! When I have had such great memories like this. Not going to be a long outro or anything. Y'all be safe. Have a great day. Peace.